This will be tape number 6 of this 12-tape set of recordings made on the Serenity Sail and the Big Book Cruise. This talk was given on Tuesday morning, August the 30th, 1988, while cruising off of San Juan, Puerto Rico. On this tape, Charley discusses Chapter 4, We Agnostics, pages 44 through 57 of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. The approximate listening time for this recording will be 61 minutes.
Bill's convinced me in this chapter. No doubt in my mind now that if I don't have this vital spiritual experience, I'm going to end up going back to drinking. And that doesn't necessarily mean I like it at all. Nor does it necessarily mean that I believe that I can have a vital spiritual experience. Even though we can see the need for it, many of us may think that because of what we've been in the past, that God's not going to have anything to do with us. You see, if you'd been raised in a good Southern Baptist church like I was, and if you'd heard about hellfire and brimstone, and going to hell for lying, cheating, stealing, drinking whiskey, and committing adultery, and you've been doing about 26 years of that, then you begin to think, well, God's not going to have anything to do with me at all. I just knew that God had already told St. Peter, when that little four-eyed sucker gets up here, send him downstairs. We're not going to need his kind. Yet I'm faced now with the fact that I'm going to have to find this God in some way or other. And for many of us, I don't believe we could have gone any further than that chapter 3 until we had a new understanding of God. AA has given me, I think, today 2 things that are extremely important to me. First, they gave me the idea of God as we understand Him. I don't have to worry about whether He's the Baptist God, the Catholic God, the Hebrew God, or anybody else's God. God as I understand Him. But then the second thing it has given me in this next chapter is a new understanding of God. Somewhere in this chapter, my understanding of God changed from hellfire and brimstone to a kind and a loving God. And I think the way it did it was by letting God prove Himself to me rather than this book trying to prove God to me. Most spiritual books you read try to prove God to you. But in this particular book, God will prove Himself to us if we'll follow a certain procedure. This chapter, We Agnostics, is kind of a spiritual kindergarten, which gives us a way that those who were non-believers before or who believed and acted as non-believers could get from that state to the state of one being a true believer who could find that power. And in doing so, he talks about the agnostics, the atheists, the true believers, the ones who have faith and the ones who do not have faith, and how we can get from the state of being a non-believer to the state of being a true believer. And it's a very simple procedure. On page 44, in the preceding chapters, you've learned something of alcoholism. We hope we've made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. If when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, or if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, you're probably alcoholic. I just love the simplicity of the big book. 2 simple little questions. And if we ask ourselves these 2 questions and we're alcoholic, we're bound to say no to both of them. If when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely. Well, I certainly could not quit entirely, even though I had tried over and over and over. Or if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take. I didn't have any control at all over the amount I took after I had the first 1 or 2 drinks. Then you are probably alcoholic. You see, what people do and what the fellowship does and what the book is designed to prevent is people changing, adding to, moving around, and causing this information to become garbled. What we've done within our fellowship, we today have a pamphlet that has 44 questions in it to see whether you're alcoholic or not, and you really just need these 2, that's all. I'm so glad that Bill or Ebby didn't have the 44 questions when he went to see old Bill. He'd have said, Bill, has drinking been interfering with your reputation? Hell, he hadn't had any reputation in years. He'd have said, Bill, has alcohol been interfering with your sex life? He hadn't had any of that in years either. They're just 2 simple questions. Can you quit entirely on your own? Do you have little control over the amount you take when you want to start drinking? If that be true, then you're probably alcoholic. And that's all we really need, no more than that. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. We're one of the few people in the world that have an illness which involves the body as well as the mind that can only be overcome by a spiritual experience. Also, we're one of the few people in the world that have a terminal illness that you come out of it in better shape than you were when you went into it. Think about that a little bit. A terminal illness that we come out of in better shape than we were when we went into it. Now, one who feels he's an atheist or an agnostic, such an experience seems impossible. But to continue as he is means disaster, especially if he's an alcoholic of a hopeless variety. To be doomed to an alcoholic death, step one, or to live on a spiritual basis, step two, are not always easy alternatives to face. But it isn't so difficult. About half our original fellowship were of exactly that type. At first, some of us tried to avoid the issue, hoping against hope we were not true alcoholics. But after a while, we had to face the fact that we must find a spiritual basis of life or else. And perhaps it's going to be that way with you. But cheer up. Something like half of us thought we were atheists or agnostics, and our experience shows that you need not be disconcerted. And I found for me, when I got to this point, that I needed to stop and kind of look at me and my ideas about spirituality and about God and see where I stood and try to see whether I was an atheist or an agnostic. Was I? Because I knew I was in trouble right here. I knew God wasn't going to have much to do with me. I knew that for years and years I'd driven down the streets on Sunday morning and I'd been looking up at those people going to church, and I'd say, look at them weak suckers. If they strong as I am, they wouldn't be going up and down those stairs in the church professing to believe in something that they probably don't believe in anyhow. And because of what I'd done, I was very, very confused right here. We have a couple of visitors. Shirley, you know who they are? Okay, I thought maybe they came in with you. Ladies, good to see you this morning. We're involved in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Make yourself comfortable. Stay with us. We'd be glad to have you in here. Okay? They had they had some Monopoly boards and stuff in here the other day. I don't know where they are now. Okay. I found that I had to go look and see what an atheist is, or what an agnostic is, before I could really determine where I stand. And I looked up the word atheist, and I found that an atheist is one who says that God does not exist, doesn't believe in God. Therefore, the atheist believes that the human mind is the end-all and the be-all of everything. That the human mind is the greatest power on earth, and if he has no God and does not believe in God, then the atheist must stand on his own 2 feet, must make his own decisions, must run his own show, because there's no greater power that he can turn to. So I said, Charlie, are you an atheist? And I said, no, I'm not an atheist. Certainly not an atheist. So I said, well, maybe you're agnostic. So I look up the word agnostic, and I find in very simple terms that agnostic is one who believes in God, but since you can't prove his existence, he's afraid to try, and he acts like the atheist does. The agnostic believes in God, but acts as if God doesn't exist. The agnostic does. He stands on his own 2 feet, makes his own decisions, runs his own show, and never turns to God or that power for help. He does it all himself. And even though he believes in God, he acts as if he disbelieves. He acts exactly like the atheist, and therefore he gets the same results that the atheist got, which is nothing. And I said, Charlie, are you an agnostic? And I said, you bet your boots I am. All my life I've believed in God. Now, I don't know whether it was taught to me, whether I was born with it. I don't really think it makes any difference. As far back as I can remember, I've always believed in God of some kind. Now, I had no trouble with this God thing until in my Baptist church I began to get a little older. As I was a kid growing up, you know, they said, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this, you can't do that. If you do this and that, you're going to die, you're going to go to hell, sure as anything. Well, I didn't have any trouble with that until I got to be about 13, 14 years old. And I began to worry and think about some of that stuff they were telling me I couldn't do. But I didn't do it because I knew that if I did it, I'd go to hell sure as anything. And one day that preacher looked me straight in the eye and he said to me, think about doing it, it's just as bad as doing it. And I thought, oh, shit. Because I sure as hell been thinking about doing it. And then I thought, well, if I'm going to go to hell for thinking about doing it, then I might as well go ahead and do it. And I did it, and nothing struck me dead. I didn't go to hell, I didn't think immediately. And I thought, well, that sucker's been lying to me about everything else. From that day on, I just put God's laws aside and began to operate on my own will. And I think that's where most of us are when we come to AA. I don't think we're atheists. Hell, I've never seen a true atheist. Even a true atheist will believe in evolution. And if evolution isn't proof of a power greater than human power, I don't know what else is. But I think most of us were agnostic. Most of us believed in God of some kind, but acted as if God did not exist, acted as if we disbelieved, and we got the same thing out of that the atheist got out of it, which is absolutely nothing. If a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago, and I believe that's true. Now, I've never seen an alcoholic that was a bum. Now, I've seen a lot of drunks that are bums, but there's a difference between a drunken bum and an alcoholic. A drunken bum is just about where they want to be. They're doing just about what they want to do, and they're really not too interested in changing their life. An alcoholic will be with a drunken bum, but the alky doesn't want to be there. The only thing is he can't get out of that mess because of his alcoholism, but he's not there by choice. I've never seen an alcoholic yet that didn't have a code of morals. I've never seen an alcoholic yet that didn't have a good philosophy of life. We know what we're supposed to do. We know we're supposed to work. We know we're supposed to take care of our families. We know we're supposed to take part in our community. We know those things that we're supposed to do, but we can't do them because of our alcoholism. If those morals and if those philosophies of life could have saved us, many of us would have recovered long ago. But we found that such codes and philosophies did not save us, no matter how much we tried. We could wish to be moral. Oh my God, how many times? How many times have we said, I'm never going to do these kind of things again? Not just drinking, lots of other things too. And said, I'm through with that, I'll never do it again, and turn right around and do it again. Whatever it is, over and over. We tried to be moral. We could wish to be philosophically comforted. In fact, we could will these things with all our might. But the needed power wasn't there. Our human resources, as marshaled by the will, were not sufficient. You see, if you're atheist or agnostic, your human resources is all you got to go on. And as marshaled by the will, they were not sufficient. They failed utterly. Lack of power, that was our dilemma. God, that's so true. Lack of power. That was our dilemma. And I know that's got to be true because if you and I could have found the power in any other way, we would be members of Alcoholics Anonymous. I've never known any alcoholic that set out to become a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. We came here because we had to. If we could have found the power, if we could have solved the problem in any other way, we certainly would not have become members of AA. Hell, this is the court of last resort. We were driven in here because we could not find any other way to live by. We had to find a power by which we could live. And it had to be a power greater than ourselves, obviously. You know, we've been trying on ourselves for years. But where and how were we to find this power? Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable you to find the power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. And we need to read that very carefully. It doesn't say which will help me solve my problem, or which will enable me to solve my problem. It says the main object is to find a power greater than myself, which will solve the problem. Up until this time in the book, I've been looking mainly at one thing: sobriety, sobriety, sobriety. And page 45 said, that really don't have a hell of a lot to do with it. Page 45 says it's to find the power. And if I can find the power, then the power will take care of the sobriety, and to my amazement, everything else as well as sobriety. And I think the interesting fact about the big book is this: from page 45 on, we don't talk about alcohol anymore. From page 45 on, we talk about one thing and one thing only, and that's how do you find the power? And if we find the power, then the power will solve the problem. Now, I don't care whether we're an overeater, whether we're a gambler, whether we're in Sex Anonymous, or whether we're a member of Al-Anon. From page 45 on, the book fits us exactly. Because from page 45 on, it deals with one thing and one thing only, and that's human nature. We're not going to be talking about diseases anymore. We're going to be talking about human nature and how do we fit into the scheme of things so we can find this power. Now, I thought in the beginning that this would be a job that is absolutely impossible based upon my old understanding of God. I thought in the beginning it would be a job impossible based upon what I'd been in the past. But you know, I find that it's really a very simple procedure. And it is so simple that most people have entirely missed it. And it's really nothing new. God, I'd like to stand up here today and say that we in Alcoholics Anonymous have found this thing, and humankind had never seen it before, but if I told you that, I'd be telling you a lie. There are some basic principles that have been known to humankind for thousands of years, that if you follow them, you can always be a success at whatever it is you're wanting to do. At whatever it is you're wanting to do. In our case, it's to recover from our disease. Page 47 gives us the starting point. In the middle of the page, it said, we needed to ask ourselves but one short question. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there is a power greater than myself? Now, the agnostic already believes. The atheist can become willing to believe. And this opens the door for anybody, anywhere in the world, by that one little statement. As soon as a man can say that he does believe or is willing to believe, we emphatically assure him that he's on his way. It has been repeatedly proven among us that on this simple cornerstone, a wonderfully effective spiritual structure can be built. Asterisk, bottom of the page. Please be sure to read Appendix 2 on spiritual experience. It's the third reference to that appendix. This time the reference is made referring to this wonderfully effective spiritual structure. The structure that we are building is the spiritual experience. It is the personality change sufficient to recover. And Bill paints that structure in our mind with words. We saw him talk about willingness being the foundation. And now we see him talking about believing being the cornerstone. We've already put in the foundation. And now we put in the cornerstone by believing or being willing to believe. And it says that was great news for us. For we'd assume we could not make use of spiritual principles unless we accepted many things on faith which seemed difficult to believe. God, that minister used to say to me, son, all you got to do is have faith and you'll be all right. Well, hell, I could just barely believe. And there's a big difference between belief and faith. Belief is upfront information. Belief can be nothing more than just suspicion. Faith is after the fact information. Faith is knowledge. And there's a big difference between belief and faith, or suspicion and knowledge. You know, the first thing we get in AA is belief. We believe that maybe we can get what everybody else in this program has. We keep hearing people talk about God, the power greater than himself, how God has solved the problem for them. We begin to believe that maybe that can happen to us. We don't know that. The only thing we can do in the beginning is to believe. Well, I didn't think you could make use of God and God's principles unless you had faith. Simply because that's what my minister had told me over and over and over again. Let's look on page 51, and let's see what we can do, starting with belief. In the middle of page 51, he said, this world of ours has made more material progress in the last century than in all the millenniums which went before. Almost everyone knows the reason. Students of ancient history tell us that the intellect of men in those days was equal to the best today. Yet in ancient times, material progress was painfully slow. The spirit of modern scientific inquiry, research, and invention was almost unknown. In the realm of the material, men's minds were fettered by superstition, tradition, and all sorts of fixed ideas. You know, this is absolutely true. Nearly everything you and I use today, our automobiles, our airplanes, our television sets, our hair dryers, our microwave ovens, our gasoline lawnmowers, all these things we use today have been invented within the last 100 years. And there was a time in my life when I thought that apparently those people that lived 1,000 years ago were dumber than hell, or they would have been in these things also. But the students of ancient history say, no, that isn't true. That the intellect of people that lived thousands of years ago was just as great as it is today, but they were not allowed to use their intellect because of superstition, because of tradition, because of fixed ideas. They didn't invent anything new. And the reason they were afraid to use any new ideas is because you got in trouble if you did. You know, it wasn't too long ago in the United States, we were burning people at the stake up in Massachusetts because they dared to believe differently. And we called them witches. 1,000 years ago, if you were walking down the street and you had a box with a hole cut in front of it, and somebody said, what is that? You said, that's a television set. And they said, what are you going to do with that? You say, I'm going to take this thing home and I'm going to see pictures clear from the other side of the world. They'd have said, man, you crazy as hell. They'd have hung you just sure as anything. They wasn't about to let you run around telling those kind of lies. It's only in the last 100 years that superstition, tradition, and fixed ideas have been cast aside, and we've been allowed to use our intellect. And the first thing you have to do to use your intellect is to believe differently. If you believe the way you've always believed, you'll stay exactly the way you are forever. But if you dare to believe different, and then if you're willing to do something about your belief, then you can become anything that you want to be. The best example I can think of is the next sentence. Some of the contemporaries of Columbus thought a round earth preposterous. You know, about 500 years ago, this guy named Columbus was floating around out here, same place we are, trying to find land. He was in a hell of a shape, too. You know? Back in Columbus's days, they were trying to find a new trade route from where most of them lived on the shores of the Mediterranean or the western part of Spain and Portugal. They were trying to find a new trade route to a place that they called the East Indies. Now, the East Indies we know today was over in the China area. And what they had found over there was gold, silk, and spices. And the only way they had to get them was to travel by land. They had to travel from the end of the Mediterranean, across land, all the way to the East Indies, get their gold, silk, and spices, and come all the way back. And they had to do that by camelback, horseback, by foot, and it took literally years to make the trip. Well, naturally, people wanted the gold, silk, and spices in a hurry. So they were trying to find some new way to get there. And somebody said, well, is there any way you can get there in the ship? And they said, well, hell no. They said, man, that's solid land. You can't sail across that land. And somebody said, is there any possibility of sailing in this direction and getting there? They said, no, you can't do that. Because they said, if you sail out here too far, you're going to sail off the edge of the world because the world is flat. Now, that sounds preposterous to us today, but remember, 500 years ago, everybody thought the world was flat. And if you sail out there too far, you would sail off the edge of it. I guess the reason they believe that is people went out there and got lost and didn't come back. And they assumed that they had sailed off the edge of it. Now, here comes Columbus along, and Columbus was big enough to dare to believe differently. You know, Joe and I, we swear to God that Columbus had to be an alcoholic. You got to be tough to be an alcoholic. You got to be stubborn, bull-headed, and self-willed, and to stand there in the face of all the rest of the world and dare to believe differently and express a different idea, you got to be pretty tough. Columbus said, I don't think the world's flat. I believe that it is round. Now, based upon his simple little idea, the life of everybody living on earth at that time changed, and the life of everybody that's been living on the earth since that time has changed, because Columbus dared to believe differently. Yes?
May I have your attention, please? Will passenger Deborah Miles please contact the purser's office, 1226. Deborah Miles, please dial 1226. Thank you.
And we know that Columbus has got to be alcoholic. He made one of the most drunk statements I ever heard. He said, I believe that you can get east by sailing west. And if that isn't a drunk statement, I never heard one. He said, I really think that we can get over there to the East Indies if we'll sail west in this direction. Another reason we think Columbus is alcoholic is when he left, he sure as hell didn't know where he was going, did he? And when he got there, he didn't know where he had been. He didn't know where he was. And when he got back, he didn't know where he had been. Those are all characteristics of an alcoholic. But I think what really made him alcoholic is that a woman financed the whole trip. Now, he first went to the King of Spain. And the King of Spain said, oh, no. Or King of Portugal. And the king said, oh, no, Columbus, you don't get the money. He said, well, you sail out there and sail off the edge of this sucker and we'll lose it all. That's when he finally got to the Queen of Spain and sweet-talked her into the money. And he took that money from her. And then Columbus followed a pattern which humankind has always known that leads to success. First, he had to believe differently. And he believed that the world was round, that you could get east by sailing west. And that belief was different than anybody else on the face of the earth. He dared to believe differently. But his belief didn't do him any good, because he's still standing on the shore of the ocean the day he expressed that belief. Now, it was weeks, months, years later that Columbus made a decision. And his decision was, I'm going to go find out if this sucker's round or flat. But that decision didn't do him much good either, because he's still standing on the shore of the ocean the day he made the decision. And again, some weeks, months, or years later, he began to take some action. And he went to the King of Portugal. He went to other people and finally went to the Queen of Spain and got the money. He took the money. He bought some ships. He hired some crews. He provisioned the ships. And then they began sailing across the ocean. They took action day after day after day after day after day, sailing straight west. And eventually, one day, they ran into land on the other side. He got certain results from that action. Then when he came back home, he no longer had to believe. He now knew. But you got to remember, he had to go on belief only. Not knowledge, but belief. In fact, they tell us that Columbus hired a special crew member, put him on the lead ship with a lantern at night. And he said, I believe that the world is round. But he said, if you see the edge of this goddamn thing, you holler so we can get this thing turned around. He went on belief, not knowledge. Now, when he got back home, he went right back to the Queen of Spain. And she said, Columbus, where's the gold, silk, and spices you promised you would bring me? He said, honey, I didn't find any. But he said, tell you what I'll do. If you'll finance me again, I'll go back, and this time I'll find them. And she did finance him again. And he got some more ships, more crews, more provisions, and they began to sail west. But this time, he didn't have the special crew member on the lead ship at night, because this time he knew that the world was round. He knew you wouldn't sail off the edge of it. You see, he went back on faith. But the first time he went on belief. Now, our 12-step program is designed in exactly the same manner that Columbus used. And it follows the same formula that humankind has always used for success. For instance, in step 2, we come to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. In step 3, we make a decision. We make a decision to turn our will and our life over to the care of God as we understand it. In step 4 through 9, we take action. Those are all action steps. Now, as we take the action, we do just what Columbus did. We get results. He found land. We find the promises on page 83 and 84. They are the result of the actions that we have taken. In 10, 11, and 12, we continue the practice of this thing until finally we have a spiritual awakening. And those of us who had a spiritual awakening in step 12, we don't believe anymore. We know. When I go talk to a newcomer now about God, I don't talk about what I believe to be true. I talk about what I know is true. And the only reason I know it is because I followed the same formula that Columbus used. Our book says you can't give something away that you haven't got. And one of the greatest problems in AA today is we've got people trying to give spirituality away that don't have spirituality in their life because they've never taken the action. 1, 2, 3, and quit. And you'll never get the results until you do the action. So you see, AA is nothing new. You'll find this same formula at the basis of every true spiritual movement in the world today. And how do you know a spiritual movement is true? Well, does it work? If it works, it's true. You find the same thing in the Quran. You find the same thing in the Torah. You find the same thing in the Bible. And you find the same thing in the big book Alcoholics Anonymous.
Muhammad Ali, cabin number 4036. 4036.
God, I hope he's not on there.
1199. Thank you.
Muhammad Ali, that's what he said. Now, if we can see that, and if we can see the same thing can take place in our life that took place in Columbus's life, then we don't have to worry about proof anymore. We agnostics, all we got to do is start the process rolling. We don't have to prove nothing. And the big book shows us in a case or two in this chapter where proof is not always right anyhow. Those of us that kept waiting on proof find out that proof is not always true. The little example in the next paragraph about the Wright brothers, I think illustrates that proof is not always correct better than anything I know of. He said, we ask ourselves this about some of us not just as biased and unreasonable about the realm of the spirit as were the ancients about the realm of the material. Even in the present century, American newspapers were afraid to print an account of the Wright brothers' first successful flight at Kitty Hawk. Had not all efforts at flight failed before? Did not Professor Langley's flying machine go to the bottom of the Potomac River? Was it not true that the best mathematical minds had proved man could never fly? Had not people said God had reserved this privilege to the birds? You know, in this century, the one we're living in today, there was a time when the best mathematical minds in the world had actually proven mathematically that you could never build a powered aircraft that would pick itself and the weight of a pilot up off the ground. And everybody had given up on that idea. And the reason they had is because everybody had failed. Now here comes the Wright brothers along. And I think one of the reasons the Wright brothers were successful is they wasn't smart enough to know that they couldn't be. Now, they were not aeronautical engineers. They were not mathematicians. They were both high school dropouts. And they were both bicycle mechanics. Now, how in the hell a bicycle mechanic could believe that he could build an airplane that would fly is beyond me, but they believed that they could. Now, based on their belief, they cleared the bicycle shop out and laid out a big table there, and they laid out paper on that table, and they began to design an airplane. They didn't go to the other people's designs because everybody else had already failed anyhow. They said, hell, let's don't talk to the mathematicians and the aeronautical engineers because they don't know what they're doing. And they designed an aircraft. And they built that aircraft in that bicycle shop. And they took it out to Kitty Hawk one day and tried to fly it, and sure enough, it didn't fly. It crashed. And I can almost see Orville turn to Wilbur and say, damn you, Wilbur, I told you this wasn't going to work. Wilbur said, no, let's take it back to the shop. Let's modify it, repair it, put it back together, and we'll try again. And after some repeated efforts, one day that thing did fly with one of them flying it. And somebody saw it, and he run to the telephone, and he called this American newspaper man, and he said, quick, 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 put it out over the wires of the world. The Wrights have successfully flown a powered aircraft at Kitty Hawk today at such and such a time. And the newspaper man said, you crazy as hell. He said, if I tell that lie, they'll fire me just as sure as anything. You see, proof is not always right. Proof is not always right. Visual proof, hearing proof, touching proof, tasting proof, and smelling proof is not always right. This thing right here is solid, but it really isn't. He talks in here about the prosaic steel girder, that to touch and sight feels and looks like it's solid. But there's millions and millions and millions of little particles whirling around in there making up that prosaic steel girder. It is not a solid piece of material, even though we think that it is. He talks about faith in things that we don't understand. You know, most of us say, well, we can't use God because we don't understand God. But we use a lot of things we don't understand. We don't understand electricity. Even with all the brilliant minds in the world today, nobody knows how electricity works. Oh yeah, we know you can take an armature, spin it inside of a field, it'll produce a current that we call electricity, But where in the hell does it come from, and nobody understands it at all? But that doesn't keep us from using it. You know, every time I walk over there and turn that light switch on, I expect those lights to come on. And I certainly do not understand electricity, but I use it every day. Oh, I don't understand God either. But I can certainly use God's power in my life just as well as I can use the power of electricity in my life. I don't have to understand God in order to be able to use Him. And that's what this thing is designed in this chapter to tell me. Now, if I know I've got to have the power, and if I know that the finding of the power begins with nothing more than belief, then about the only other thing I need to know is where is that power? And my book even tells me where God is. All my life I've looked for God. Somewhere as a kid, I guess maybe I saw a picture. I don't know really. But in my mind, God always dwelt up here somewhere. And He usually was on top of a cloud, standing up, and He was a tall, elderly gentleman. And He had on long, flowing white robes, had on long, white hair, and He had a golden halo around His head, and sun rays were shooting out of it. And I've looked and looked and looked and looked and looked for God, and I never could see Him. I think the reason I thought He dwelt up there is because every time the preacher talked about God, he always looked and pointed up there. And I assumed that's where God was. But what really confused me is every time the preacher talked to God, he looked down here. And one time it's up here, and next time it's down here, and I didn't know where in the hell God was. And I think the reason I never could find Him is because I never knew where He was. The book tells me on page 55 where I'm going to find Him. No, God isn't hard to find because God isn't lost. If you've been here since the beginning of time, it's awful hard to get lost. And I don't really think God's that difficult to find. Page 55 said, "Yet we'd been seeing another kind of flight, a spiritual liberation from this world. People who rose above their problems, they said God made these things possible, and we only smiled. We'd seen spiritual release, but like to tell ourselves it wasn't true. Actually, we were fooling ourselves. For deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. It may be obscured by calamity, by pomp, by worship of other things, but in some form or other it is there. For faith in a power greater than ourselves, and miraculous demonstrations of that power in human lives are facts as old as man himself. We finally saw that faith in some kind of God was a part of our makeup, just as much as the feeling we have for a friend. Sometimes we had to search fearlessly, but He was there. He was as much a fact as we were. We found the great reality deep down within us. In the last analysis, it is only there that He may be found. It was so with us. Now, I think my book is telling me that God dwells within me. And I think it's telling me that God dwells within every human being. And today I believe that all human beings, deep down somewhere inside themselves, there is some form of basic knowledge, some form of basic intelligence that tells us how we should live and how we shouldn't live, that tells us what's right and what's wrong, that tells us what we ought to do and what we should not do. And I think some people might want to refer to that as common sense. I think other people may want to call that innate intelligence. I think others may want to refer to that as the conscience, and some may want to call it the soul, and I really don't think it makes any difference what we call it, as long as we recognize that it is there deep down within each one of us. If I can accept this in my life, then this gives me an entirely new understanding of God. This gives me a personal God. If He dwells within me, then by golly, He's a personal thing to me, and I don't need to worry about whether He's the God of the Baptist Church, or the Catholic Church, or the Hebrew religion, or anybody else's church, because if He dwells within me, then He's my own personal God. And I know He's there. Hell, I've always known the difference between right and wrong. I've always known what I should do and what I shouldn't do, but I took that knowledge and I buried that knowledge in my chase for the things of the material world. In my chase for money, power, prestige, and sex, I put aside all of God's knowledge that was within me and began to operate on society's knowledge, because those are the things that were exciting. As a young fellow growing up, I didn't think that the God things were exciting enough, so they were buried deep down in it. But they've always been there. I think they've always been in every one of you too. And I think we've all experienced that knowledge from time to time. And I used to, I'd get ready to do something, and something inside me would say, "Charlie, I don't believe you ought to do this." and I wouldn't pay a bit of attention to it, and I'd go right ahead and do it, and I'd just get in a hell of a shape, get in all kinds of trouble, and that little voice would say, see, I told you not to do it. It's always been there, but I never could listen to it before. Now, if I can bring that knowledge to the surface and quit operating on Charley's knowledge, then maybe I could find a way to live where I could be sober and peaceful and happy and free at the same time. Maybe I could find a way to live where I could be free of shame, fear, guilt, and remorse, and maybe I could stay sober and not have to go back to drinking alcohol in order to feel better. You see, this is an entirely new concept of God for me. And I think that's what the book has done for so many of us, is given us a God that we can live with, because a little later on we're going to have to make a decision. And I don't think I could have made that decision without this chapter in the big book Alcoholics Anonymous. And I think it fits exactly where it belongs, between insanity and making a decision. Anybody got any questions? Anybody got any comments? Everybody satisfied with God as we understand it? I've either done a hell of a good job this morning, or you all haven't listened to a damn thing I've said, one of the two. I really think this is one of the greatest pieces of spiritual information I've ever read anywhere in my life, contained in just a few short pages in the big book Alcoholics Anonymous. Mario?
Hi, I'm Mario, and I'm an Al-Anon. I may have lost my question.
She said she may have lost her question. I like that. Here's a question.
I'm Margaret, and I'm Al-Anon. Hello, everybody. I don't have a question. I just have a comment. That one of the first tapes that I listened to when I first came to my program was the tape by Chuck C. And he said, God, in his sense of humor, has hid himself in the last place we'd ever look, inside ourselves.
Yeah.
And that made a great impact on me then.
The reason I've spent so much time on the doctor's opinion in these first 4 chapters is this. We're laying the groundwork now to make the decision we're going to be called upon to make in the next chapter, chapter 5. Now, what you and I know today, the decision step as step 3, was originally through the Oxford group, step 1. You see, they didn't have a book back in those days. And when Bill and Dr. Bob and Bill Dotson, when they found a drunk to work with, they went to that drunk wherever they might be, in the hospital, jailhouse, or their home, and they sat down and they told their own stories. And through the telling of their own stories, they convinced that person that he was alcoholic. They talked about the disease. They talked about the physical allergy. They talked about the obsession of the mind. And they would convince that person that he was alcoholic, his life was unmanageable. They would help him take what we know today as step 1. But it was not a step 1 in those days. It was simply information they gave to that person so that person himself could see the powerlessness. And then they would say, do you mind if we come back and visit with you in 2 or 3 days? And they would come back a couple of days later and they would begin to talk about spirituality. And they would talk about how they had had to find a new power, and how that power had to be one that they could come to terms with. And they would talk about it in such a manner that they could help that person begin to believe that the power could work in their life too. They helped him take their, what we know today as step 2, but they didn't have a step 2 like that in those days. And after they had convinced that person of step 1 and 2, or powerlessness and power, then they said, would you like to go to a meeting with us? And they would take him to an Oxford group meeting. And they would say to the people in the group, now look, we've been talking to this fella, and we're convinced that he knows he's alcoholic. And we're convinced that he believes in God. And we want to sponsor him into the group. And then everybody would vote whether to let him in or not. That's what sponsorship was in those days. It was just like sponsorship in the Rotary Club, the Eastern Star, or anything else. And then when the group accepted him in, Then 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 of them would take him upstairs in Dr. Bob's house. They would all get down on their knees, and he would take what we know today as step 3. He would make his surrender. And then they would all vote on how well he made his surrender. But you see, they had the opportunity to deal with him on a one-on-one, face-to-face basis to help him find out he's alcoholic, to help him come to believe in a power greater than himself. Now, they knew when the book was written that the guy in St. Louis would not have that opportunity, that they couldn't see him on a face-to-face basis, and he had to get that information out of the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous. The big book is the perfect, complete 12-step call. So through the doctor's opinion in the first 4 chapters, we have given to the newcomer everything that he needs to see his powerlessness and to believe in the power greater than himself. In other words, to take what we now call step 1 and 2. Step 1 was Dr. Silkworth's idea. Step 2 was Dr. Jung's idea. And Bill used the doctor's opinion in the first 4 chapters to get those 2 ideas across to people that he knew that they would never be able to see. And it's the most valuable tool that you and I have today. In conjunction with us telling our own stories, we can use the doctor's opinion in the first 4 chapters as a teaching tool. There's nothing wrong with teaching. Teaching is just transference of information from our mind, or the mind of the first 100, to the mind of the newcomer. And we're missing that opportunity. We're not using the book like it needs to be used. And if we'll use it right, along with our story, then we can help that person see their powerlessness, and we can help that person come to believe, and then that person can be ready to make a decision. You see, what we're doing in most cases today, we're starting the newcomer at step 5. I mean, at chapter 5. We're starting a newcomer at step 3. We're starting a newcomer at the decision point. Well, hell, he can't make a decision because he don't know what he has to decide between. He don't know 1, he don't know 2, and therefore he can't take 3. So I think if we'll begin to use the book as it's designed, we can really, really begin to make some changes. Not only in the number of people we help, but in the depth of the help and for the fellowship as a whole. Yeah. Any comments, questions, criticisms before we quit? Jackie? I stay that way. Go ahead.
Hey, I'm Jackie, an alcoholic. I've listened, and it's like I have yet to be able to decide in my mind the difference between belief and faith. Can you make this simple?
Yeah, let me give it to you. There used to be a commercial on TV about the ring around the collar. And the commercial was aimed at you ladies, and it was about getting that dirt out around the collar of the man's shirt, and we all have it back there. Now, you could watch that commercial, and it was obvious that if you used their stuff, and they were telling you the truth, that it would get that dirt out of the collar of that shirt. But you didn't know that. All you could do is believe what the person on television told you. Now, if you believe that's strong enough, then you would make a decision. The decision would be to go to the store and get some of that stuff and bring it home and use it. The decision, though, wouldn't do you any good unless you took the action. So after you decided, you would have to go to the store, buy that product, bring it home, get the dirty shirts, put them in the washing machine, and wash the damn things. And then when they come out of that machine, you look at that collar. If the collar is clean, then you know this stuff works. And when you use that box up, the next time you go to the store to buy it, you don't go on belief. You go on faith. And it's just that simple. Now, see, I believe what people in AA told me. I believe that God could restore us to sanity. But I didn't know that until I made a decision and I took the action and I got the promises, and then one day I realized God has restored me to sanity. Well, today I know that. So when I go talk to a newcomer, I don't talk to him about what I believe. I talk to him about what I know. And then through what I know, I can help him believe. And then he can make a decision and take action, and then he'll know, and then he can help the next one.
My name is Diana Cross, and I'm a grateful alcoholic. A good friend of Phil's and mine uses the difference between, or showing the difference between belief and faith. And you go to a circus and you see a tightrope going across the hall or between the tent. and there's a guy that's standing up there that's going to walk across the tightrope. We have belief that he can do it because we don't think he'd be foolish enough to try it if he didn't do it. Already know how. And we see him walk across that. We see him push a wheelbarrow across the tightrope. And we believe he can do it because he's done it. Faith is getting in that wheelbarrow.
Yeah, pretty good explanation. Yeah. Yeah. Jim?
Faith is getting in that airplane.
Yeah.
That's how.
Yeah.
Believing it's flying one thing, but faith is getting in the plane.
I think another good example, Jackie, would be when this cruise first came up. You believed that you could come on this cruise, but you really didn't know that, did you? And you had to make a decision and take some action, and sure enough, here you are today. Now, if we take another one of these, and you decide to go on the second one, you won't go on belief, you'll go on faith. You'll know that you can go the second time. Right? And our problem is all of us want faith, but we would like to have the faith without the stuff that goes before it. I walked in a hospital room not long ago, an alcoholic laying in the bed, a member standing there beside him with a big book, and I said, "Great, I'm glad to see you reading the book to him. What are you reading?" He said, "I'm reading him the promises." I said, "Did you read him what goes before the promises?" He would love to have them, but he's not going to get them without that action and stuff before the promises. That's the only way you can take them and get them is to take the action first. Anything else? Mary, she thought of it this time, Jim. You don't have to answer it.
I could hear your story, and I could believe that it worked for you. But I had so much fear, I guess fear of change, that for a long time I couldn't get past the fear to take the action.
Mm-hmm. Right. But then as you hang around long enough, and you see more and more and more people saying the same thing, then you begin to believe also. And then that belief leads to decision, which leads to action. Many of us come in AA, and we're stuck on step one. Many of us know we're alcoholic, and we're powerless over alcohol, but we don't believe that a power greater than ourselves restores to sanity based upon old ideas. See, I could not take step two for a long time because I thought God was a punishing God. And it's only when you all showed me different, and chapter 4 gave me a different understanding of God, then's when I began to believe. And then's when I decided, and then's when I took action. See? Jim?
I grew up Church of Christ. Well, you know, it's real tough when you controlled everything. You've been real competitive all your life, and you're too busy being an agnostic, and you're too busy being narcissistic, and you know all the answers before the questions. Then how does God get into your life? How do you have faith? How do you have anything? Until you accept and read about unconditional love in the book of the Bible, for instance. Unconditional love is acceptance of everything. And also, if you're so busy the first 4 years like I was, or doing everyone else's inventory, you don't have time to do your own.
That's right.
See, you don't ever get step 4. You do them first 3, but there's a lot of things happen, and you become severely depressed and hospitalized like I was after 4 years. You don't have spiritual experiences. You think it's silly when someone like your aunt runs through there and jumps, and that's crazy. Or speaks in tongues. You deny all that. But I don't deny that today. I've never understood speaking in tongues, or I would never make fun of someone who said they could speak in tongues. I don't do that today. Fine. But so I'm more accepting and more open, and I feel better, and I have my level of serenity that today is how good I'm going to feel, and how much I accept, and the degree of my acceptance, and what I do. So, but when you're raised Church of Christ, or you're raised Southern Baptist, believe me, that agnostic part, you better study that book. You better really get with it.
You better read it close.
And you better listen close. And also, you got to start listening. And, I was at Wolf Street one day when we had a subject one Sunday morning. I bet Bernie was there, and the lady said, "Let's talk today on listening." And the chairman, or somebody else had a question too, said, what was your subject again, ma'am? Another thing too, you might remember in Bermuda, I was in Bermuda at a conference, and they brought the newcomer in, 14-year veteran in this program. And the newcomer didn't want this God bit. And heard a lot about God at that meeting in Bermuda for the first 3 or 4 meetings. He said, I don't like the God bit. I like your program, I like what you do, but I don't like the God bit. And the old boy said, well, why don't you just keep coming back and play like you're not him?
I think one of the, and I'm speaking now of my own personal opinion, I think one of the worst things happening in our society today is we're teaching everybody how to make a living, but we're not teaching people how to live. Used to, we took kids and taught them how to live. Today, our emphasis is on material things of life rather than on spiritual things of life. And I grew up not knowing how to live, and I think it's terrible for me to have to be 40 years old before I could really begin to learn how to live. I thought our whole happiness was in money, power, prestige, sex, all those material things of life. And I was really taught that as I grew up. And hell, I didn't know how to live when I came to AA. Everything I've learned good about living, I've learned since I came to the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I learned it out of that book. And I think it's terrible today that we're not teaching people how to live and how to be happy. And we don't. We don't teach them that in school. We don't really teach them that in college. And we don't really teach them that in most churches. See, my church didn't teach me how to live. It taught me how to not live. Well, now it's damn hard to go by the rules unless you understand what the rules are about. And they told me what I couldn't do, but never did they tell me what I really needed to do in order to live and be happy and not break those rules. And I think that's terrible. I really do. Now, that's my own opinion as of today. AA has nothing to do with that. Any other comments or questions before we break up? Okay, we've prepared all the groundwork now. On the next session, we're going to be ready to get into the program of action. We're going to make our decision, and we're going to start taking the action to carry out that decision. We're going to use the action to find the power. And then hopefully by about sometime Friday, we will have found the power and we will have all recovered from our disease, whatever it might be. Thank you all for being here this morning. Have a good time today.
This will conclude Charley's discussion of Chapter 4, We Agnostics. Please go to tape number 7 of this 12-tape set of recordings for his discussion of Chapter 5, How It Works through Step 3. Please fast forward this cassette to the end before turning the tape over to replay the recording or before storing for future use.